Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from around the planet. Welcome back to Creation Conversations for this special Q&A session. And Diane, you're here in person, still here with us in the UK. And we've, of course, got John and Craig and Sam with us as well. So how are we all doing? How's it going in the world of Down Under?
Well, here in Queensland, we've got a day planned at Jurassic Ark on Monday, but maybe not. The Weather Bureau, who wants their name changed from BOM, Bureau of Meteorology, bomb, they're under weather bombs, and they're having a weather bomb at Gympie, apparently. So we're maybe going to be flooded out. So we'll just watch and pray and see what happens. That's about the latest from this end because of the weather. I've got a big camp coming up, but more about that a bit later. Craig, you've got something exciting to share?
Yeah, would you like me to share that now?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Go for it, mate.
Okay. Well, yeah, during the week we had a couple come in to the museum. Quite exciting news. Really, it highlights the importance of the ministry, I think, for people with questions like they had. It was Angelina and Stuart came in. Stuart claimed to be a Christian, although there was no Bible in the house from what I could determine. But he certainly had a Christian background. But Angelina didn't and was very skeptical, had a lot of questions that our ministry really does provide answers to. And I'll just put my PowerPoint presentation up. You got that there? You got that there, Joseph?
Yeah, ready to go.
Yeah, okay. So these are some of the questions that they had. Why are there so many nasty people in the world, i.e. the problem of evil? Where did all the different languages come from? Why would God put an evil serpent into the Garden of Eden? And how is the Bible structured? Amongst a whole bunch of other things. We spoke for well over an hour. And I posed 3 essential questions that I think all people should consider. And they are these. Is there a God? Now, Angelina was willing to accept already that there probably is a God, just from design and things that she sees in the world, some sort of spiritual connection there. But the second question that follows on from that, well, if there is a God, who is that God? And that's where really Angelina was up to. Who is that God and what evidence is there for it? And the third question, that once you've determined that, then what does God require of me? And of course, I was able to present to her that the Bible says God requires you to repent and believe. And the good news is that Angelina was very excited to find answers. She was more than pleased for me to share her story. And we took this photo in front of her favourite display. I asked her, what's your favourite display in the museum? And this was it, the one sort of showing the time lengths of the patriarchs and the ages and the history of the early parts of the Bible. And she was really interested to see that and how the flood was the real changing point in terms of lifespans and history there. So they were really excited to find that, and she was even really excited to get a Bible that we've got there. The Bible Society has donated a whole bunch of Bibles to us for these very occasions, and she even asked me to sign in the front of it, which was really nice. So I put Hebrews 11:6 in there, which is God's promise that if you earnestly seek him, you will indeed find him. So that was really good news for the week. I also went up to Fossil Bluff in northwest Tasmania, which I've got a little clip we're just going to see there. Beautiful view from the top of the bluff. That's looking east across the township of Wynyard towards Burnie, if you know the area. But if we can get that video up now, I think that's controlled at your end.
Yep, that's fine. I'll sort that out now.
Thanks, Sam. Tasmania, near the town of Wynyard. It's called Fossil Bluff for a good reason. There's millions of fossils here. Let's have a look at a few. They occur in the lighter sandy looking layer above the grey one. We'll talk about the grey one in a moment. There's some fantastic fossils have been found here. Even out on the rock platform closer to the sea, there's been wombats found and whale fossils found as well. But here, there's some great shell fossils. There's one right there, another one down here, and you can see the fragments of a lot of other shells throughout the layer there. But this also goes way up the cliff, many metres. Down below it, there's a different sort of layer. It's called till, and the general explanation is that this is deposited by a glacier. I think on the sign it said 500 million years ago, so that's very old. But in it you'll notice lots of rounded rocks embedded, suspended in the rock. Without a doubt they've been moved by something, rounded, all the sharp edges taken off and dumped catastrophically here. I think there's potentially another explanation. We can discuss it further. Of course, Noah's flood might be the solution to this general geological formation that we're seeing here. Okay, so that's just a bit of a clip there I thought I'd take. I'm a beginner at this, but there you go. There's something to at least start the geologist talking about. And had a bit of a chat with John about it, and there's every evidence is that this is a result of flooding rather than glaciers. The glacier, by the way, was supposed to be about 25 kilometres wide at least, and came from the far west coast down past Zeehan. So a big glacier in the at least secular understanding. Any comments on that, guys?
It'd be great to. Sorry, go ahead, John.
What's interesting, Craig, is that having been there many times myself and followed it up and gone to the National Museum to talk to the curator there about actually getting to see the specimens. Now, the sad news is that curator hates my guts. So there's nowhere in the world he's ever allowed me to actually see the fossils that came from there. So we simply take the word of it. They found, do you remember the name of that marsupial fossil they found there, Craig?
Yeah, it's called Wynyardia.
It's like a giant possum creature, isn't it? Yeah, that's right. And it's one of the marsupials, the bigger ones, and it's found right beside a whale, according to the research. And that, of course, creates a catastrophic dump scenario. And some of you may have noticed that the shoreline, the shore platform, there's other levels higher than that in the background cliff you would have seen behind Craig. So again, it's examples of climate change that have nothing to do with current climate change or sea level change. Either way, it is both made for higher coastal platforms as well as lower ones. So lots of stuff there. Great place to go. Craig, you take field trips around Tasmania?
Yeah, we certainly take a number of trips around. We're still sort of building that part of the ministry up, but there's a dedicated crew that like to get out and have a look around the place, and we do our best, not being geologists as such, to find fossils and interpret some of the evidence, but learning each day. Even it was interesting to notice on the sign that they've got there at Fossil Bluff, it says that lower grey till layer is actually 500 million years old. But in the book that I've read about it and elsewhere as well, it says it's 300 million years old. So there's 200 million year gap there straight away. And then the sandy coloured layer with the shells in it above it is only 22 million years. So there's an unconformity there of missing in the order of 280 million years.
Because glacial tills are quite interesting. We have a lot of things that are considered tills around Norfolk, and I've travelled all up and down the coast. And what's always fascinated me in Norfolk in particular is, like you say, Craig, there's very little evidence in many cases that whether it's glacial or whether it could be just a big flooding event, right? Essentially, you're dealing with the same thing because it is a flooding event. It just happens that the water in the flood is solid, but there can be a lot of similarities. But in particular, the thing that I like, what you can find in Norfolk, is you have these enormous cliff beds, right? And the cliff in the chalk cliffs in Norfolk are sometimes over 1,000 feet thick, right, in the centre of Norfolk, the chalk goes down 1,000 feet. So it's a huge thing. And then in one particular place in Norfolk, you can actually find the chalk on top of the glacial till. So this is a flood deposited rock, which is on top of a supposedly glacial deposited rock. But what really fascinated me is if you trace it back, you can find in between the flood deposited chalk and the supposedly glacial deposited till, there's actually a thin layer of rock, which is only a few centimeters thick in general, but it has lots and lots of much larger boulders in it. So it's almost like a rusted iron layer, and it's got huge boulders and cobbles and all sorts of stuff in it, and sometimes even fossil wood. And this is in Norfolk, right? And you have these rounded pebbles which come from as far north as Norway, and stuff which is the closest found as far north as Scotland. And there's all these, we call them erratics, right? They're really rounded, they're really smooth, and they're underneath the glacial stuff, and they're on top of the flood stuff. And the generally accepted cause of this is that there must have been a huge river at some point that flowed from Norway to Norfolk and brought all these rocks down with them. Right now, there's been no, although this has been offered, this has been offered as an explanation. No explanation has been offered as to where did that water come from? How can we find evidence, or can we even find evidence that there was a river that size? And also, if there was a river that size, it would have to be on such an enormous scale. It would be essentially a worldwide river. So it does make you question these things sometimes. Of course, if you want my perspective of it, having collected all up and down there and collected the rocks, personally, I think we're looking at evidence of what it says in Psalm 104, when the land rose up out of the sea and the water washed off the land down into the valleys to the place where God predestined them to go. And you've got evidence of this flood runoff, right, carrying these rocks as far north as Norway and Scotland down to Norfolk. And that's, of course, is because it's in between these flood rocks and these glacial rocks. So it's a fascinating dig to go through all of these kind of layers around the world, particularly stuff that's supposedly glacial till or not.
Joe, since you mentioned Scotland there, I better jump in being a Mackay, because I still remember visiting a professor in Glasgow who was a fair expert on many of the so-called glacial areas. And given that our whole program is basically dedicated to that biblical verse, let this mind be in you that was also in Christ, we make no apologies. We are desperately, we are deliberately, we are consciously, we are always looking for ways to get the world out of our minds in terms of all of their godless theories, and make sure that, as you did, you put Psalm 104 in there and you put a biblical perspective. As I said, we make no apologies for that. That's what we're doing. But what I found interesting with this professor, because I'd been working on an old mining site the Romans had built up in just on the border of England and Scotland. I'd been working on some of the rocks a little further south, in which there are quite a few so-called glacial scratches. And yet there were a few anomalies here that made me go to this professor. And so I asked, I said, what's your opinion of these scratches? Are they glacial? He said, well, people tend to forget that if you have a glacier, it certainly will pick up rocks. It certainly can scratch like a big bulldozer along the rock underneath. You can end up with orientated or directional scratches indicating where it's come from, where it's gone to, and usually a pile of till or mixed rubble. The characteristic of till is it's got all sorts of sizes of rocks and shapes of rocks, no consistency like a stream would sort out. But he said you can also get that result from massive underwater landslides, because the landslide will begin to accumulate stuff, and then it will act in exactly the same way a glacier does. The rocks, the big parts, will be at the bottom. They'll be pushed along. They'll scratch. It'll be directional. Then you'll end up with a big pile of muck, unsorted, because it hasn't been sorted by streams as they gently and evenly spread things out into layers. And I thought, well, that's very interesting, particularly in the light of Psalm 104, where it says he raised up the mountains, he sank down the valleys. Now, the Bible is not just about Noah's flood, where it rained for 40 days and 40 nights and everyone went home and it was all nice again. It was also about flooding the whole world. And then at the end of the flood, the mountains are raised up. the water runs off, the valleys sink down, and the water runs back to a place where God has appointed it to go. Now, if you're going to raise up mountains on the scale of the mountains we've got post-flood, then you are involving an incredible amount of energy, all underwater, of course, so the heat to be rapidly dissipated. But in reality, you will end up with possibilities of what that professor was saying: mega underwater slides, massive glacial-like scratches that you could misinterpret if you only had glaciers as your mindset and not the whole biblical picture. So for those of you who want to follow much of what we do, Psalm 104 is a good read because it's simply a Hebrew view. It's in, by a Hebrew mind, and it uses Noah's flood and creation as its background basis. So thanks for reminding us about that, Joe.
It's also worth noting that a lot of these glacial tills are almost completely devoid of fossils. They often have nothing in them whatsoever, a few bits of rolled chalk or a few bits of, occasionally a shell here or there, but a lot of them have no fossils in them whatsoever. So that's always intrigued me, as this is supposed to be a slow accumulation. As these glaciers begin to build forward, you'd think that they'd catch up something, right? But there's just nothing. So
they will have fossils, Joe, in the rocks that have been brought with them. Because
but nothing caught up in them in terms of caught up as it's supposedly forming. So I personally think underwater landslides fits the picture much better in most cases. But yeah.
So my question there is, what is this unconformity where you've got the grey filled with the rounded rocks and then the shells in the layers above it? How has that sort of come to be? There's obviously been a big landslide, and then some other stage of the flood or something has then deposited the shell layers.
Well, actually, what you're talking about is unconformities. I'm going to suggest to Joe that we actually do another whole program on the geologic column, but this time on what's missing from it. Right. So you actually deal with these unconformities, because right through Tasmania, where you and I have climbed up the mountains onto the plateau, in central Tasmania there, or down at Wynyard, you have vast amounts of the rock record supposedly missing, and yet one layer sits immediately on the other. It's not as if you had a massive deposit, then over the next 100 million years, it was slowly eroded away. There's no evidence this ever was an exposed surface, right, where you had plants and everything growing, or a sea depositing creatures slowly. It's just one thing, then it's another. So it's a good question you raised, but I suspect we probably should do a whole program on it. What do you reckon, Joe?
I think that sounds like a very good idea. My only thoughts on the deposit itself, and let me know your thoughts, John, is that because you've got things like these fossil marsupials and things inside the sort of sandy layer above, and you've got all the shells and stuff like that, that is a stereotypical small-scale catastrophe, post-flood kind of event. So you're probably looking at, in this case, two separate events for depositing it, for sure. But you're probably looking at you're certainly looking at a post-flood event for the layers on top, much like your places up in where is it, John? Is it out by the Darling Downs, where you get all of the fossils and stuff like that? Yeah. Very similar. So there we go.
Yeah.
No, great stuff. Thanks for that report, Craig. That was fantastic. And yes, John, I think we should definitely do an unconformity type thing. I think that'd be good. Yeah. All right, should we give our update?
Yes.
Yeah, we've been pretty busy on the road quite a bit since last time. Diane, you were in a hotel and we were preparing to go on a field trip, weren't we?
That's right.
And how did that field trip go? How did you feel that one?
Oh, it went really well. It was great.
It was good. Yeah.
Families that came along really enjoyed it.
We were blessed with wonderful weather until sort of the last hour.
Yes. Then we got a good dose of British weather, wind and rain.
Yeah, it was hilarious. I was listening to Diane chatting to people about how She loves England because it's always green and fresh. And then about 10 minutes later, it started chucking it down. And I was like, "You sure you still love it?" Because it was this cold, Arctic rain coming down. But there we go. We found some great fossils.
We found some lovely
It's changed
fossils,
a lot
yeah.
since the last time I was there and the last time that John took me there, because they've put in big cedar fences, and so there's not a lot of fossils exposed. But we eventually got down there. We eventually found where the fossils were. We got some great ammonites and some great shells and all sorts of stuff like that. No fossil fawns, because of course we have found those down there before, but not this time. So there we go. And
we found some wild cabbages.
And we found some wild cabbages. What was important about the cabbages, Diane?
Well, last week we did a program about cabbages, but cabbages are interesting because, according to Professor Dawkins, they are wonderful evidence of evolution. Look at all the varieties you get with broccoli and Brussels sprouts and cauliflowers and Savoy cabbages and kale, superfood, and collard greens and all those things. Now, you could go to the greengrocer and buy all of those things, and you might have bought 6 different vegetables, but you've actually only bought one species of plant. So there's definitely no evolution there.
No, and so it was great to discuss not only the evidence for Noah's flood, it was also able to discuss the evidence of creation, right? And after their kind, with the Ammonites and all that kind of stuff. So it's well worth coming on a field trip, whether it's with John, whether it's with Craig, or whether it's with us. It's great to get out there and get hands-on and explore the world. And then we travelled all the way back up here to Oswestry, which is where we currently are. We're in the new museum building in the Creation Research Centre in Oswestry. So we've been busy with lots of different things. We've been out to another homeschool day today, which was over in Cambridge. So it's sort of 3.5 hours over there, 3.5 hours back, which I know doesn't sound like a lot if you're in Australia or the States, but it is an enormous amount to do in one day here in the UK. But we did it, and it was great. It went very well, and it was very well received, which was wonderful. But Diane, we've brought you here for sort of a specific reason. A big part of it has to do with what's coming up later on this or next week. What have we got coming up?
Well, we're in the Potential Creation Research Museum. I mean, it's a real museum in a real building. It's just slightly disorganized at the moment, but it's full of the most wonderful things, and we've been having a marvelous time pulling out all of these different fossils and starting to sort them out and to photograph them and record them. And we'll be doing a bit more of that this week. And then at the end of the week, next Saturday, we have an open day for people to come and see what we've started and get an idea of what this project is going to be all about. Get to see some of the exhibits, actually pick up and hold them, see wonderful fossils and artifacts, and see the potential for displaying the manifest and wonderful works of the Lord.
Absolutely. So that's happening on Saturday week. All the details are online. We've got a full program which will be published shortly as to what's happening. But this coming week, we've got a lot of work on. We've got some great volunteers, and yes, there's still time to come and volunteer if you can. So please try and make it. We've not only just got to try and get this organised and sort stuff out, but we want to start cataloguing the fossils. We want to start setting up for display. We've got to clear everything and get it ready for the open day itself and prepare for the open day. But we also want to try and start to get that system in place, which means we can become a active museum, because as I say, this is not just a working museum, it's also a museum in the works, right? So it will always be a working museum in the sense that there will always be research going on, experiment stuff that you can come and get involved with. There will always be new exhibitions being designed. There will always be stuff changing about. So it's a working museum, but for the time being, at the least, it is a museum in the works. We're a long way off the finished product, so we've got a lot of work cut out, but please do come and help us and volunteer if you can. And if you can make it on the open day, which is Saturday week, then do come along to it. It promises to be a great day. Go and book your tickets now. We're actually nearly fully booked, so if you do want to come, you do really need to book your tickets now, but it promises to be a great day. Lord willing, we'll have John share some stuff with us virtually. You'll be here, won't you, Diane?
Yes,
sharing some stuff. I'll be here
Yes.
sharing some stuff, and we'll be doing some great things. So it'll be wonderful to have you along to come and see where we are, come and see the potential that this building has and the impact that it has, not just for the local area, but also for, well, certainly the whole of the UK and possibly even on a bigger scale, the whole world, because you find that Creation Research UK, even though we're here in the UK, we are, of course, part of the Creation Research worldwide team, right? Whether that be Craig in Tasmania, whether that be John in Queensland, whether it be in the States or here in the UK, we all work together and we all support each other and we share things around, right? And so by supporting one of us, you're supporting all of us, and it means that you're allowing us to travel all over the world and collect these fossils and do this research and share this message and actually bring it back home. But the idea is not just to have this one big museum here and that's it, right? The idea is to use this place as the facility for creation research to sort of sustain creation research in the UK. So not only do we have a museum, we also have exhibits that are designed that can get shipped around the whole of the UK. They can go on display in a church, in a local creation discovery centre, you know, creation research discovery centre type thing, which can be shipped around and continued to be designed. And so there's always something new, there's always something changing. We can facilitate field trips, we can have interns come in, and you know, I was even talking to some people earlier, because from the home educated background, right? But it doesn't matter whether you're home educated or not, even if you're just going through education, something that I try and encourage parents and young adults to do and to think about carefully is, should I really be going to university? I mean, these universities are getting worse and worse and worse, right? And they're becoming more and more expensive. And so we like to remind people, well, if you're just going for learning's sake, there's much better ways of just learning. So we want to be able to facilitate that when people can come here and do internships with us and actually learn how to do science and learn how to do research and actually get it from a biblical perspective. So we have got a lot of work over the next little while. We've got a lot of stuff that needs doing and organising. So please do support us and the Trust. But Diane, we're not just preparing for the open day. We've also been doing some interviews for a new documentary, haven't we?
Yes,
About
we've
venom
started on
and
that. Yes,
bitey things. But also, something you might remember, when Diane was last here in the UK, we wanted to try and film around the museum tour, which worked part of the way, and then we lost all the files. We couldn't do anything else.
Isn't technology wonderful?
It is indeed. But we're going to try and do that again, aren't we?
Yes, we are. Yes.
And so we're going to make, what's the plan to produce?
Well, we'll look at some of the exhibits that we've got here, some fossils, some artifacts, some various other things, and just discuss what they are, how significant they are, how they fit into the biblical history, how they are good evidence for the biblical history of the world, because God is the God of the real world. So here we have some real things which show the authority and sufficiency and accuracy of Scripture.
Yeah. And so I'm going to try and make a series sort of, 20 to 30 minutes long. There's quite a number of titles in there. We were sitting down writing down some ideas.
Yes, lots of interesting topics to do on human design, on fossils, on biblical history, on evidence for Noah's flood, and all sorts of things like
rapid
that.
Burials,
Rapid
stuff.
burials after their kind.
It'll be great.
All the-
Well, before we
Yes.
finish and throw it open to questions or whatever anybody else wants to comment, let's just talk about one or two quick show and tell kind of things here, Diane, because we're actually going to start filming this series tomorrow, and it'll go out on YouTube, or we're thinking of even starting up membership on YouTube, so maybe it'll be there, who knows. But we'll certainly get a whole series recorded. But Diane, what have we got just down over here? One of these wonderful specimens. Because of course you're not squeamish about these kind of things, are you?
Look at that.
There we are. Look at this fantastic human skull. And this is real, isn't it, Diane?
This is real. Now, in case you're wondering, there are legal ways of keeping real human bones for medical and for scientific research purposes.
In
And
fact-
so we have acquired these by proper
Yes,
legal
absolutely.
means.
And in fact, you were saying that when you started medical school, you had to go and buy a whole skeleton.
Oh, yes.
So this is a known thing. This is
Oh, yes,
perfectly
yes.
fine. But we've got them here, and we've got some other things which we'll hold up and show and tell, and hopefully you don't mind the sort of the macabre, because really what we're looking at here is design and evidence
Yes,
of
it is.
design. So we're going to have a whole series on design of the human and the wrist and so on and so forth, but also looking at the differences between apes and humans and things
Yes,
like that.
indeed.
Well, I've got another human limb here. You can see it's our sort of lower limb. There's the patella, the kneecap there, and you've got your leg bones and your feet bones and how it's all fitted together. So Diane, can you just run down through some of the evidence there? Because there's some people who claim that this is actually a poor design, the way that all of this fits together.
Well, actually, the foot is a brilliant design because the foot actually has 3 arches in it. You've heard of the arch of the foot. Well, it's not just 1 arch, it's actually 3. There's one that goes across the foot like that, and then there's 2 that go along the length of the foot, so on the big toe side and the little toe side, and all of the toes are very tightly bound together, which is very different from an ape foot. An ape has a flat foot with the toes splayed out, and the big toe is actually quite separate, a bit like a thumb on a hand. So human feet and ape feet are very, very different. Human feet are designed for weight bearing, so the shape of this actually spreads out the weight, and the arch gives it the spring that we have in our step. And as we know from architecture and building, an arch is a very strong structure. So having an arched foot, it's designed for weight bearing. An ape foot is not, because apes actually are quadrupeds. They walk on all 4s. They can walk on 2 feet for short distances, but human beings are designed to stand upright, so our weight is distributed in our feet, and to walk upright. And we are designed to walk sort of heel to toe like that, and the arch just provides that extra piece of bit of spring and compliance. Actually gives it a bit of a bit of flexibility there. So this is actually a very brilliant piece of design. It's not at all useless.
And extremely strong as well. The load bearing from
Yes.
sort of top to bottom is just phenomenal, isn't it? So we can talk obviously about the design, we can talk about differences between apes and humans, and that leads us on to a little sneak peek of next week's Creation Conversations topic, because we actually requested this, weren't we? Recently in London we were able to talk about it, which was to do with vestigial
Vestigial
bones,
organs,
that
yes,
kind of thing.
that's right.
So what I have here, I'm going to bring it back a little bit and try and get the whole thing together. We actually have a human vertebrae. Again, this is real, isn't it, Diane?
Yes.
And you can see it's a medical specimen. It's all been sort of strung together. And the vertebrae is a fantastic piece of design, and it's great to see how it all fits together. It's absolutely beautiful, really. But the bit we're interested in is actually down here. Now, what you can see down here, Diane, this is the little coccyx, which of course is one of those famous vestigial organs, the tailbones, isn't it? You know, left over from our evolutionary past when we were monkeys. So,
Do you know what? Actually, it looks kind of like a rattlesnake tail, doesn't it?
it's true.
Doesn't it?
Well, without giving too much away, Diane, give us a little bit of background to this rattlesnake tail. But also, what I'm more interested in is this bit here, this part, because this is part of the pelvis, isn't it? And the kind of design, the difference between this, what we've got here, and what we see in apes. So take it away.
Yes, well, actually, this little triangular bone here was not originally thought of as being a vestigial organ or a useless organ. Its name is coccyx, and that just describes its shape. It's a triangular shape with a curve in it, and the first person who gave it a proper name thought it looked a bit like a cuckoo's beak, you know, like a bird's beak.
Yeah.
So that's where the name comes from. It doesn't come from any evolutionary sort of idea. It wasn't until the evolutionists tried to find similarities between human anatomy and ape anatomy that they thought, oh, well, we've got this bit that hangs off the bottom here. Maybe that's a tail that's shrunk, but it's nothing of the kind, because you have to remember nothing in biology works on its own. These are just bones, but bones are connected to ligaments and muscles. And one of the most important functions of bones is to act as anchor points for our ligaments and our muscles. And down in your pelvis, you have some really important muscles that keep your pelvic organs in. under the force of gravity, so they have to be pretty strong, right? Human beings are designed to be to stand upright, so the pelvic floor has to do a fair bit of work, which means it needs some good anchor points, and the coccyx is actually one of the important anchor points for the ligaments that connect the pelvic floor muscles. So very important part of the body, nothing vestigial about it at all.
Great stuff. And we're going to discuss more about
Diane, if I can just throw something in that you're aware of, I've got absolute personal experience of the importance of that, because I used to do a lot of swimming until one day I heard almost snap inside my body, and I was in real agony. So I staggered out of the pool, went to the doctor looking like I'd been riding a horse for 50 years, and he almost laughed, a personal friend. He said, "I can tell what's wrong with you. You've snapped the ligaments that come off your tailbone." I said, "Don't just laugh, Doc, do something." And he said, "There's nothing I can do. You'll just have to lie down and wait. It will heal itself." And that was sort of 6-7 weeks of agony until it did. So take my word, absolute personal experience. It is a vital, functional organ. And because Sam cracked a funny before, I'd better throw in a real funny that involves an insurance company, because I have skeletons around the place too. And I took one to a meeting and somebody stole it, right? And so I put in an appropriate insurance claim. And what was interesting, the insurance company got in touch with me and said, "Mr. Mackay, we've never had a claim on a skeleton before. Was it new or secondhand?" So I had to tell him, "Yes, only by a little old lady in India." So anyway, that's my contribution there.
Well, one last thing to talk about, Diane. Just say that you'd found just this little bit of pelvis down here, right? Just this one little section, and you hadn't got all these vertebrae. Would you be able to tell whether the creature that this came from walked on all fours or whether it walked on two legs?
Yes, you can, from the orientation of the these joints. See, if we just turn it around to face the camera there, that is actually a joint surface, so you can tell where that meets the other pelvic bones and the way this is orientated. So yes, you can tell how the bones and joints actually fit together as to whether they're designed for an upright being or for a quadruped.
Yeah. So if you find bones, especially pelvis bones, you can tell whether they were quadrupeds, whether they were bipedal, whether they walked on 2 or 4 legs. And so there's clear distinguishes then between what are ape pelvises and what are human pelvises. You can clearly tell the difference.
Yes, you can, particularly if you've got the rest of the pelvis.
Yeah. No, it's great stuff. So there you go, some fabulous human bones, genuine human bones, real human bones as well. So that's excellent. We'll put that down over there for the moment. But we're going to be filming a lot more about that tomorrow, and we're going to be doing a load of great stuff over the next few days. So do support us if you can. Support the Creation Research Trust in the UK. Support your local creation research organisation, group, office around the UK, because it really does help all of us to be able to not only acquire great fossils and great human artifacts and things like some of the great stuff that Craig has got down in his museum, but it also allows us to continue to produce these kind of materials. It allows us to continue with creation conversations for sure. So we really do appreciate your support and help. But there's a few little snippets and a few updates from us here in the UK. So there we go. Sam, how are we doing with questions and stuff? Are we all ready to sort of dive into questions?
I would certainly say so. It's good to have everyone here for this special question and answer program. Usually we run out of time for questions because we have so many come in. I've been saving questions in the chat, and I've also got a Word document up with some questions on that I've been putting into Restream so I can pull them up. So I will start, as we should do, with some thanks. So we've got I Am Matt coming in with a super sticker for US Buckaroos, a pair character exaggeratingly stretching his arm forward to offer a cup of coffee. I don't have a cup of coffee today, but there we go. Thank you for that, Matt. Well, I would like to point out we are not sponsored in any way by Pepsi Max or its affiliates. Other sodas are available. But we've got...
This is just what the food station on the way home happened to have. So
there you go. It's just pure coincidence it happened to be Pepsi Max. And we've got Super Sticker for $1.99 US Buckaroos and Open Eye with the words sneak peek.
Sneak peek. Oh, wow.
I haven't heard that one before. But, I was going to do something with my eye there, but that might be slightly disturbing if there are any children watching. But anyway, so we'll drive right into a question here. This sort of relates slightly to what Craig and we all sort of touched upon earlier in terms of coastlines. This comes in from Doki Doki. Is it true US coastal towns have disappeared because of erosion over the years? I would say yes.
Yeah, there's a particularly famous one called Dunwich, which is in. I better not say it's in Norfolk because it's not. It's in Suffolk, and they get very upset. But it's right on the border of Norfolk and Suffolk, and it's famous enough to the point that eventually, when the tide is really low, you can still see the church spire, which occasionally sticks out of the sea. Right. This is not a case of a change in. A change in sea levels, but it is coastal erosion, right? It's all sand and dunes, and a lot of stuff is what we call fixed dunes. There's a lot of fixed dunes on the sort of Norfolk and Suffolk coast, and this is where the dunes have built up to the point that grass is actually able to hold the sand dunes in place. But ultimately, it's still sand. So if the plant goes and the sea eats away at the sand, eventually you're going to end up with a massive amount of erosion, which allows, basically like anything with sand, it just completely disintegrates and the water just floods in. But you've got to remember, we do have records of what the UK looked like not too far back and even slightly further back. And so we have records from the Romans. We know what the coastline looked like. And we know that a lot of people, including the Romans, did the similar thing to the Dutch in terms of like pollarding, right? So actually creating channels and ditches and funneling the water out to sea and allowing the land to build up. But you're always going to be susceptible to flooding. You're always going to be susceptible to erosion because you have no solid fixture underneath you. Now, there's a biblical point there somewhere, I'm sure. But you'll find that what you're really looking at is not evidence of different sea level changes, specifically in this case anyway, but you are looking at evidence of mankind building up sandy platforms to build their houses on, and then the sea doing the inevitable. But yes, you do have a lot of coastal erosion, particularly in places like Haysborough and stuff, where the cliff faces there are very, very sandy and very, very, especially when you've got sand at the bottom and then a much heavier material at the top, right? You just get natural coastal erosion. But John, you've travelled all up and down the east coast of the UK. I'm sure you've got examples.
I'll take you to the west coast. If you start at Glasgow and head towards Skye, which is easy to get to today, you don't have to do like good old Bonnie Charlie did and row over or anything like that. But if you follow the road, instead of turning left to go over the bridge to Skye, you just keep going north, you will find the opposite of what's happened on the east coast. You will find what appear to be elevated castles. They're sitting up high and dry, and the sea level has actually dropped, or has the land risen? Hard to say. The most consensus is that the west coast of Scotland has risen. It's not the sea level change, it's the coastal level that's actually risen, perhaps tectonically, whatever you like. It's debatable, but either way, the end result is you can see a castle with big moats around it, and now separated from the sea by technically islands. So all up and down the coast, you will see evidence of change. But the sea is staying in one place. It's the land that's rising. You can see it all around the north of Ireland as well, right? So if you want to see the opposite of coastal erosion, go to the west coast of England. And of course, then you go all around the top. You see the same all along until you get to my hometown of Tongue up there, way up there on the north coast. And if you want to know why the Mackays came from that area, my dad said it was as far we could run while the English were still chasing us. So that's what you'll enjoy.
Yeah. If you want to look up a specific example of what John was talking about with the castles and the build-up and stuff, look up Harlech Castle in Wales. That's a really classic example of because you can see where they actually built the castle on the edge of the cliff, and they had stuff where they could lower ladders down into the sea and bring up cargo from the ships. The only problem is that the sea is about a mile in the opposite direction now, so it really is quite a stark example of that.
And as George Bond has highlighted, if the rates of erosion are so great, we shouldn't be seeing much land out there really if there's been so many millions of years. And that was the same at Fossil Bluff actually. The complaint is by the locals how quickly the cliff is falling away.
Yeah, exactly. Great stuff. How do you spell that, Joe? I'll put it into the chat. Hold on.
Yeah. And my dad's come in to the chat. Hi, Dad. Saying we reported on a whole hotel that fell into the North Sea in Scarborough in the early 1990s due to coastal erosion. And for those who are unaware, my dad used to work for the BBC doing reporting and even had his own radio show at one point. So, yeah, I do miss that radio show. It was very informal. It's all about plants, Diane. It's called Down to Earth.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed it.
I know. I'll see if I can dig out I see if I can get my dad to dig out a clip for you. I'll send it over so you can have a
I'd love to hear it. Yes.
Yeah.
And just to be not outdone by Craig, for those of you who live in Queensland who are brave enough to wake up early and watch our show, if you want to see it here in Australia, go to Stradbroke Island, to Moreton Island, and then look up the historical maps where you could actually walk from the Gold Coast all the way up the islands. Now, there's 3 breaks. Mostly they came overnight in massive storms, and you can see where they used to run their cattle all the way up and down those islands because they were isolated. They were still fairly isolated place. When I was a kid, we used to go there and camp and hunt, totally unbothered by the police or locals or anything. It was a great place to be. You could drive your car without a license, fabulous, all sorts of stuff. It was a bit of a political nightmare because nobody wanted to own these islands. They're now cut off several spaces where the erosion did them in overnight. So it does happen, and it does happen quick enough to dump hotels into the sea.
So great stuff. All right then. Let's move on, Sam, to some more questions. What else have we got?
Yes, indeed. But first, we must take a quick diversion to a super chat that's come in from George Bond for 20 Aussie buckaroos. He says, at the rate at which the White Cliffs of Dover are eroding, there shouldn't be in England today.
Absolutely.
They'll always be in England. What's your problem, no matter what happened to mistrust?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think
moving swiftly on.
Yes, I think we should probably stay away from the imminent political problems that are going on in the UK and move swiftly on to something we can actually comment more consistently on. So it quite often in sort of in coastal erosions and things like that, they quite often use scientific simulations and computational bits and bobs and visualizations using computers. So this question sort of comes in quite nicely. How much faith should we put in scientific computer models / simulations? So I would assume this would be to do with all sorts of things, whether that's simulations or models on evolution or things like that. So my personal answer would probably be, it would depend on what field you're looking into and how biased the science is based on those simulations.
Diane, you got a comment on this one?
Well, it's a bit like the old joke about the first law of computing being garbage in, garbage out. It does depend on how you set up the model. In other words, what parameters you define, what data you choose to put into it. So there is an awful lot of manipulation that can be done with models. So you need to keep that in the background. A model is something that is made by human beings. I mean, it may be just a computer program, but it is something that has been thought up by a human being. Therefore, you have a worldview, you have an idea of what should happen, and you choose what data you choose to put into it and how you're going to manipulate that model. So you need to keep that in mind. What are the presuppositions? What are the worldview of the people who are actually setting the model up.
It's like anything. It is a model or simulation.
Yes.
It's like, we use in creation
Yeah.
research models of human skulls and models of Neanderthal skulls to measure the brain capacity and stuff.
Yes.
But they have to be, we want them to be really accurate.
Yes.
So really the faith we're putting in is not in the model themselves. We're putting our faith in the people who replicated it, who designed the
Yes.
model, right? So you can buy, we've got a really cheap example of a Neanderthal skull, which is probably not accurate at all, but it's a nice model, right? It looks good. But it probably I've got no faith in it because the people who made it didn't make it for that purpose. Whereas if you buy, special scientific quality replicas of skull,
Yes.
you're buying a model, but your faith is not in the model, your faith is in the people behind the model. So we can get into our whole discussion with artificial intelligence and all that kind of stuff, but even in that case we're still dealing with the faith is not placed in the models, the faith is placed in the people behind the models, right? So really that's the question you're ultimately asking. However, John, one quick thing springs to mind, and I'll let you explain it because it came from you. Wasn't there something about climate modeling and running it backwards?
Yes, there certainly is. If you look at the webs today, you can use all sorts of models derived from climate speculation, and particularly the easiest one is sea level change or temperature change, and you can figure out where would the land level be if the sea dropped by 100 meters, or where would the water level be where would the land level be if the sea rose by 100 meters. Now, basically, both of those sort of figures are taken from actual measurements in the world today, extrapolated. Some of them are taken from, okay, here's a deep sea submersible, it's gone down, there's a beach 100 meters below the coast. That's real data. The bit that you get from watching the coast change by 0.5 centimeter in a century, you speculate that's artificial data. So you've got to be careful, as Joe said, your trust is not necessarily in the data, but in the person who's trying to manipulate the data. So check that one very carefully. Don't be a guinea pig in this whole area. And I say that because the guinea pig has been used as a model. I've just been writing a new kids book, as some of you know, and we've got extra facts in there about some of the animals that we're asking the question, did guinea pigs go on the ark? Did elephants go on the ark? Did crocodiles go on the ark? And of course, it's interesting, we use the word guinea pig, someone who volunteers for a medical test, he's a guinea pig, she's a guinea pig, right? And the reason for having that phrase is that 150 years ago, they thought of guinea pigs as having medical reactions similar to human beings. So they'd first of all try something on the guinea pig, because in those days, monkeys and chimpanzees weren't too readily available in England. Rats, they were happy to get rid of, but they didn't use them for the same reason as guinea pigs. So therefore, the guinea pig concept was a model of medical reactions in human beings. So, and it's entered into our scientific parlance that way. But of course, we would treat other animals now as more reliable indicators. In particular, people eat like pigs. The pig's stomach is a much better model for how your stomach reacts. So you've got to be careful. The pig is not a human, but it's a close semblance in terms of its behavior. So check the difference between the model and the reality. But most importantly, as Joe said, check the person behind it, their integrity, their presuppositions. Even when it comes to Christians and creation, check that above all.
Look, I've done some modelling in my ecological research years ago, and I know my own limitations, I guess, but it was to model the potential distribution of threatened plants in Tasmania based on the full knowledge of the distribution of the plants, the soil types that occurred in the forest types, and the full knowledge that we have now. And then you model all the potential sites it could be in the state. The trouble is, when you go and investigate those sites that you say are potential sites for these endangered species, you go out and you don't find any. Okay, so it can be a model even with integrity, but it's just wrong in a lot of the instances. So they're useful tools, and they're tools that will help you focus your searching, but you shouldn't rely on them as then being some sort of distribution, accurate distribution of where all these plants might occur.
In fact, Craig, didn't we find a missing plant, an unusual plant, an extremely rare plant just up the hill from your place that wasn't supposed to be there?
Yeah, well, that was actually one of the plants I was closely studying, and it wasn't known from that location, and just happened to buy a house in the middle of my research, move there, and then walk up about 3 house blocks and find it growing in a little reserve near our place.
Oh, dear.
Yes, it's like our one of our flying possums, the glider possums. They'd known it from the fossils, and if it wasn't for the fact that a geologist actually went on a holiday to the mountains, there it was as a living creature still, even though it was supposed to be extinct. So be careful of your modelling. Coelacanth, extinct, but then they found it in 1938. We've got so many creatures whose future and past is based on models rather than reality.
Great stuff. Yeah, great stuff. Thanks for that, guys. Great job. Sam, what else have we got? How are we doing?
Right. Okay. I think it's about. We've had two from the.
Keep your questions coming, folks.
Yes, keep them coming, because we do save all of the ones that we don't get to. We do save them in Word. We have a Word document for questions, and they will be saved for future programs. But I think we better get round to some of those questions that we've had from previous programs, because it's only fair. So I will pull up a question here. So this has been posted on a previous one. I'm not sure whether we've had this one before. Tell me if we have, and then I'll know whereabouts we are on the list. If some dinosaurs have feathers, would it be a problem for creationism?
That's a Joe and a Diane answer. So away you go. Even though we've touched on that, I think it's worth mentioning.
I mean, the question: if some dinosaurs had feathers, would it be a problem for creationism? It's in my mind anyway. It's a similar question to could God have used evolution? The answer is yes, he could have used evolution if it had chosen to. It would still have had to have been a supernatural act, because evolution is impossible by our understanding of biology today. But yes, he could have used it if he wanted to. The issue is not did he use it. The question is not could he have used it. The question is did he use it, right? If some dinosaurs had feathers, would it be a problem for creationism? Well, if you find a dinosaur type creature that's covered in feathers, my first port of call wouldn't be to automatically assume it's a dinosaur. My first port of call would to be, well, this must be an unusual type of bird. We see that in cases like Archaeopteryx, which is an unusual bird, but it is definitely a bird. And even the Natural History Museum in London, who really did the research on it, actually proved that it was a bird based on its brain, which is starkly different from a reptile's brain, right? And so that's something that was considered to be a dinosaur with feathers, and then possibly some kind of transitional form, and then no, it's a bird all along. If you were to find a dinosaur like a large theropod T-Rex type dinosaur with very strong evidence of feathers, would it be a problem for creationism? Well, a lot of creationists are now arguing that, well, maybe dinosaurs did have feathers and therefore that's just how God created them. Now, that's certainly one argument that you could choose. The problem is we still have yet to find any evidence of dinosaurs with feathers. And what you'll find is if you speak to people like Dean Lomax, for instance, who I know, and he had a great presentation on dinosaurs, and every large theropod dinosaur that he had was covered in feathers, right, in his graphics, in his PowerPoint, right? And I said,
Joe, tell them who Steve Lomax is. You and I know, but most of our listeners.
Yeah, so he's quite well known in the UK now. He sort of came to academia through doing great research, which was fantastic. He got involved in reclassifying ichthyosaurs and stuff like that. He's pretty well known amongst the scientific literature, particularly around ichthyosaurs and UK dinosaurs and stuff like that. Knows his stuff, does some great research, and I met him at this presentation, and he great presentation, and all of his dinosaurs were covered in feathers, right? All of his pictures and graphics. And I said to him, great presentation, but I noticed you had all your graphics of dinosaurs, these large theropod dinosaurs covered in feathers. As far as I'm aware, we have yet to find any large theropod dinosaurs that are covered with feathers, right? And he said, oh no, we haven't found any feathers from large theropod dinosaurs, but we assume that they had them because we know that they evolved into birds. Right now, do you notice there's an underlying assumption there? In fact, there's an assumption upon an assumption, because first of all, you're assuming that dinosaurs evolved into birds, which is an assumption. There is no evidence for it. In fact, Diane, I'll ask you, because there's lots of evidence to the contrary, but you're then going one step further and assuming that if you assume that dinosaurs evolved into birds, therefore you can assume that all theropod dinosaurs had feathers, right? The reality is there simply isn't any evidence for it. And you'll find that every case of a dinosaur feather has either been shown to be something along the lines of decayed collagen, which goes a bit sort of fluffy or fuzzy. I mean, it's similar kind of concept to if you sit in the bath for long enough, your fingernail will start to shrivel up, right? So it's actually an indication that these dinosaurs have been suspended in water for a while before being buried. Now, I wonder what caused that. But you'll also find that the ones that are clearly feathers are clearly feathers. They're abundantly, obviously feathers, and they're simply just bird feathers, right? So you'll find online, you can buy them, right, dinosaur feathers in amber. And you'll find the only reason why they're classified as dinosaur feathers is because they are found in amber that's supposed to be from a time where only dinosaurs had feathers. Of course, what you need to pay attention, and this is what I'll finish on and ask you to comment on the biology side of things, Diane, is there was a picture a while back in the National Geographic of a beautiful transition from dinosaurs to birds, right? From the velociraptor with no feathers all the way up to the modern day crow. And it had a wonderful, beautiful succession. And then underneath it had the supposed ages, right? And you'll find that the second to last fossil in this wonderful transitional from a dinosaur to a bird, right, was supposedly Archaeopteryx, because Archaeopteryx is a bird. And yet Archaeopteryx, this final transition into modern bird, was actually several 100 million years older than the Velociraptor was supposed to be. So the whole dates are messed up anyway in this sequence. You'll find that as far back as the Jurassic and the Cretaceous, you have fully formed birds full with feathers. There just simply isn't any evidence, certainly not for dinosaurs evolving into birds, but there simply isn't any evidence of dinosaurs having feathers either. Diane, comment on the biology?
Well, feathers show absolutely brilliant design, which doesn't make any sense if you think that feathers evolved from fibers just by pure random processes. They are far too well designed and interact with one another. So if someone claims that they've found feathered dinosaurs, you need to ask two questions. Are they really feathers? And we've reported on quite a few of these when there was the sort of big push for dinosaurs turning into, or dinosaurs having feathers, and a number of fossils were described. We've described these in our fact file. You can find them on our fact file. And so you have to ask the question, are these really feathers? And there'll be nice illustrations, but if you look at the actual evidence, they are just fibers, and some of them are splayed out, and some of them are just sort of long, hairy-like fibers. And they're always very, very tiny, actually. One thing that you don't usually get are the actual scale bars, which you have to go to the original literature for. And some of them are only millimeters long. So ask yourself, are these really feathers? Then there are other things in the fossil record that are clearly feathers, and they have all of the complex structure that fully formed feathers have, but you need to ask the question, is this really a dinosaur? And Archaeopteryx is a classic example. It's not just its brain that's been shown to be a bird-like brain. They've also looked at its inner ear, because that tells you about how good a flyer a bird or any flying creature is. And Archaeopteryx turns out to be, has the inner ear of a really good, strong flyer. And there are other examples, other aspects of it that show that it was a good, strong flying bird.
Diane, since you look after our Q&A, where can they find these sort of questions on our main website?
Well, we do specifically have a question about feathered dinosaurs. When there was a lot of publicity about them, someone, of course, wrote in and said, why can't you believe that dinosaurs evolved into birds? We've got these feathered dinosaurs. And so if you look on the Q&A site, which is just simply called Ask John Mackay, put in feathered dinosaurs in the search and you'll get that. And there are a couple of other questions relating to the supposed evolution of dinosaurs into birds. And it's not just feathers. It takes more than feathers to actually make a bird. Birds have lots of differences to reptiles, such as the way they breathe, such as their blood circulation and various other things like that.
Yeah.
And Craig,
We have
can I just get, before you say your museum, if folks want to see that, where in Tasmania they go, then take over about it.
Yeah, so our museum is in Beauty Point on the northern coastline of Tasmania, above Launceston, about 45 minutes of Launceston. And we do have a display on the feathered dinosaurs idea. And it's interesting that the evolutionist Stores Olsen from the Smithsonian Institute regarding feathered dinosaurs says that people that promote it are zealots, and that the whole idea is propaganda, it's hype, it's melodramatic, and it's wishful thinking. He just says it's a nonsense, and he wrote an open letter to the science regarding this idea. So it's a funny sort of question because there's no evidence for it, and even the evolutionists, a lot of the evolutionists would actually say it's an absolute nonsense. So we can probably spend a lot of time on it, but it's talking about a non-issue, if you like.
Yeah, hence my original point. It's a bit like the question, could God have used evolution? Well, it's a moot point because at the end of the day,
he told us what he did. So
Exactly.
Start there. Yes.
Yeah, and just pivoting from that, because I know that dinosaurs with feathers is sort of like a hot topic in modern circles, especially if you're looking at the most recent Jurassic Park films. If you look at the
propaganda.
Yeah, exactly. But at there was an unreleased scene that for the latest film, Jurassic World Dominion, where they took you back 65 million years and showed feathered T-Rex and Giganotosaurus and all those sorts of things. And I was reading some comments on Reddit on there was they've got a video game out where you can build your own Jurassic Park and have dinosaurs with humans and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, and one of the things was, why aren't there more feathered variants? Because we've got so much evidence of it. And I sort of just rolled my eyes. It was just like, if only they knew. But just going on to the dinosaur sort of feathers aspect back again, this question came in from Georgia. It was quite relevant. How could a dinosaur preen its feathers with barbs with such large teeth? I think we've answered this before.
I'm sure we've discussed that before. Somewhere in the back of my head, I had a load of notes on it because we had our question from somewhere else. I think we've had the same. I think the question came from George before. But I'm sure we've had that somewhere else, but I couldn't tell you where my notes were. Well, I think we discussed because it was something. I think it was more to do with Archaeopteryx preening with his teeth, but it's certainly something that can be done. And often, I mean, you can do it with your. Some of them do it with their claws, don't they? They're preening the feathers. So it's just a case of all you're really doing is you're taking oil from a gland and you're hooking the feathers back into place. That's essentially it, isn't it?
Oh, you can do that with your own
fingers.
You pick up a bird feather and just sort of smooth it out. And because of the way it's designed, how the barbules are designed to interact, if you just smooth it out in the right way with your own fingers or with the bird claws, they will all fit together because they're so well designed to do that.
In fact, I know from my experience in zookeeping that oftentimes if you have communal birds that live communally normally in the wild, if you only have one or two individuals, you often need to go in and preen stuff for them. And essentially, especially when new feathers grow, they come out with a little keratin sheath, and all you're doing is you're literally rubbing it in between and with your fingernails or whatever, and breaking that keratin down to allow those feathers to then go and up. So
It's a question that needs to be answered when we find feathers on dinosaurs.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Right. I have also been scouring the chat, and we've had something come in from Neil. Thank you, Neil. God bless for 10 British buckaroos. There we go. Thank you so much for that. And I don't think there's anything else here in terms of donations. No, so that's fine. So we'll move on to our next question. This one is coming in from Ravi. This is something I can even chip in on. What do you think? What do you think of that? I can even chip in on a question. Were dinosaurs included on Noah's Ark? Yes, of course they were. But he goes on to say about dinosaur. How could you fit dinosaurs in Noah's Ark? Here we go. Oh no, that's the wrong one. This one. Oh, I think he's deleted the question. But it was about how would they fit on Noah's Ark or something like that. He may not have even answered. I don't know. But you would.
Can I throw something in here, Joe? I don't know if you've got a copy handy, or Sam. You know our book, What Happened to the Dinosaurs, we did for kids. All of those sort of things are discussed in there, or on our Q&A site, right? And since dinosaurs, because we found lungs in them, because we found hearts in them, right? Because we have mummified dinosaurs. A, we know they were land creatures. B, we have the Bible that specifically says God sent 2 of every air-breathing, land-dwelling creatures to Noah on the ark, right? At least. So therefore, you'll find that the biblical description of who went to the ark, what was sent to the ark, includes the land-dwelling, air-breathing dinosaurs. So end of issue there. No personal observation. Haven't dug up the ark with the dinosaur on it yet, unless you go to Ken Ham's model, and that's what it is, a model. You will find that you can't be a dogmatist on that, except by arguing, here's what God said. Dinosaurs fit that description, so they would have been on the ark. Craig, do you have dinosaurs in your museum?
We don't have anything too dramatic, but we've got a couple of casts that you've provided. Sorry?
That we gave you.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, a T-Rex tooth and part of a Draco Rex skull. So that's they're
so they
interesting.
can come to Jurassic Ark in Queensland, to our outdoor museum, 10 hectares of beautiful fossils and displays, and you will see the big models of even, what's that one that's really only the size of a turkey, and yet in Jurassic Park, the movie, it's a chasing monster.
Velociraptor.
Velociraptor, that's right, a totally made up fictional sized monster, a modern myth, and yet it's so widespread out there. Half the questions I get about how would you escape a giant velociraptor? Well, you didn't need to. At the most, he'd sort of jump up and peck you on the knee. So you don't have to worry about velociraptor, but he would have been on the ark. And in our new kids book, which has got the crocodile on the front, did I go on Noah's Ark? You'll find we finish with velociraptor and ask the question about that. So you'll find these great topics, but it's fairly easy to answer from your Bible, a revealed word of God, and what we know about dinosaurs from the actual fossils. And the velociraptor fossils, no feathers found.
Yeah. Diane, if I could just ask you to comment on this fossil that we're holding up here, because this is relevant as well. What are we looking at here?
Here are some dinosaur eggs. So dinosaurs, like reptiles that are living today, are born out of eggs. So they start life small. And in fact, we could even go one step further, I think. Do we have the... yes, here. I'll just move out of the shot for a moment.
Now, Joe, they are real dinosaur eggs.
These are real dinosaur eggs, Hadrosaurus. They're about as big an egg as you can get, really. But yes, these are real eggs. We have an entire nest of eggs as well in our museum collection, so people can come along and see it. Oh, yes.
And here we have another egg. Now, this is an ostrich egg, so this is an egg from a big bird. Now, notice the dinosaur egg is no bigger than an ostrich egg. So dinosaurs started life out small. So it wasn't a problem for Noah. All he had to do was to take some young ones, because they start life small, just like crocodiles start life small. Baby crocodile can fit in your hand.
And of course, crocodiles, they grow all their life as
They
well.
grow
don't
all their
Diane?
lives,
So
yes.
it takes time for them to get up to these big, and by that point, they're really, really old.
That's
So
right.
when we're dealing with the really, really huge, enormous dinosaurs,
Mm.
reasonable to assume that we're dealing with the really, really old ones?
That's right. Noah would not have wanted those, because remember, the whole point of animals going onto the ark was so that they could reproduce and replenish the earth after the flood was over. So the best thing for Noah to take would have been young ones that are going to have the longest reproductive life after the flood was over. So take young ones.
It's interesting,
Yeah.
something that I've noticed with the macro reptiles, the very large reptiles,
Yes.
it can take anywhere up to 20 plus years of rapid growth before they reach what is considered as adulthood, right?
Yes.
Whether you're dealing with a tortoise, whether you're dealing with a giant crocodile, or so on and so forth, it takes quite a number of years to get, and they grow fairly slow, but they grow fairly steadily up to their adult size, and then they continue growing slowly for the rest of their lives. In fact, crocodiles don't even age biologically as we understand, well, sort of understand biological aging, right? They'll often die of disease or toothless or stuff like that rather than old age. And so crocodiles are in the archosaur grouping, so
Yes, that's right.
probably you can sort of begin to pick out some similarities between them and dinosaurs. So when you're dealing with T-Rex, because I noticed that I think Ravi's question had something to do with the growth of a T-Rex. Well, a baby T-Rex or a young teenage T-Rex, even a year on the ark, it wouldn't have grown up to full massive, house stomping Jurassic Park T-Rex. Yeah, you're still actually dealing with a very reasonable amount of growth in that time, and you're dealing with a very, very big boat as well. So
Yes.
no issue
And,
there.
and also there on that point, Joe, as well, it's worth pointing out there was a question put to you in your debate with Snake Was Right on the logistics of the ark, because obviously you've got a zookeeping background, and he was asking the question of like the area needed for an animal and things like that. It's worth bearing in mind here that the ark was purely a life-saving mechanism. It wasn't to have an enjoyable environment for animals. It was purely to preserve life in an emergency situation, essentially. And having all of these creatures in infancy both saves a lot of space and also a lot of food, because you don't need as much. Actually, I've just realised you're still on full screen. You don't need as much food or space to stay on the ark for that period of time, so the resources last a lot longer. Do you want to sort of elaborate on sort of like your conversation with Snake and how that sort of went?
You'll also find one of the things I think, if I remember correctly, you challenged me on was the fact that many of these zoos require vast amounts of workforce in order to look after them, right? And you've got to, that is correct. Zoos take an enormous amount of workforce. But you've got to understand, in zoos, you're trying to replicate an animal's natural environment, right? You could make the easy point, well, how does one farmer look after 20,000 cows? Right? How does just one, or just a handful of people look after it? Well, you're dealing with a completely different scenario, right? You're dealing with mass production, you're dealing with mass breeding, you're dealing with, all that kind of stuff. So really, again, you've got to look for like. You can't use a modern zoo environment as an example of that. And as you said, Sam, you are dealing with something which is a life preserver. So also you can into things as well, things like animals hibernating or going to a form of suspended animation isn't the correct term, I don't think, but you'll find something similar under times of stress or massive climactic change. You'll find that many reptiles can do the same thing, go into sort of like almost kind of hibernation, shut down part of their body kind of thing. Estipation, that's same concept. If I remember correctly, I think Snake asked me something along the lines of, well, you'd need, what caused them to go into hibernation? Because you'd need, like he said, you'd need massive climactic change or something. I was like, it's a global flood. That would do it.
Yes. a global flood, fairly big stress for both man
Yeah,
and animals.
exactly. Well, you've got to remember that
Yes.
Noah wasn't
Mm.
trying to replicate a natural environment within the ark. Right? It's one of the biggest issues with modern zookeeping is trying to create Australia in the UK. It's pretty difficult to do, but you're not doing that. You're surviving for a year, and you'll find that even animals, even if you take them out of their, like reptiles, for instance, if you take them out of their perfect environment or ideal environment, you'll end up still being able to survive for a year or so, even on very poor conditions. They won't survive like that forever, but they'll be able to survive for several months to a year for sure. Where are we at with more questions and stuff, Sam?
Right, it's just a follow up on the T-Rex aspect, but it wasn't just the T-Rex, but every carnivorous predatory dinosaur all on the ark together. So it might be worth elaborating on the carnivorous aspect of various dinosaurs, like, for instance, the big ones like T-Rex and Velociraptor, but also, Allosaurus, Carnotaurus, that sort of thing.
Well, first of all, I would
let me just share in some of our latest research, Joe. Sorry to interrupt you there. But out here in Australia with crocodiles, particularly when the land floods, and you see it with the reptiles in South America as well, and it's a point that Diane and I have come across repeatedly, we see sharp teeth as killers. We see the points of the sharp teeth as being penetrating flesh and dragging. Well, not so much dragging, because most sharp teeth are very shallowly rooted. So they're in and they're out, or the tooth is out. Basically, what we've observed is that when the land floods, many of the the archaeosaurs, the crocodiles, etc., will jump out of the water and pluck fruit, or they will catch it and they will actually, when it's floating, right? And what we've discovered is they can pluck things easily because they don't see their sharp points as being used. They use their teeth like a rake, and those rakes are brilliant for actually plucking fruit. And so, yes, pears, apples, grapes. We've even showed a slide on the previous show, I think even last week, of the snake eating grapes. Well, many of the alligators and that just love grapes, right? And they can pick them as easy as one thing. So don't have the presupposition that because T-Rex had sharp teeth, it only could kill things. That is a total presupposition. And the best concept is God said he made all creatures very good, and therefore they all ate plants. Now, if you want to imagine football-sized pieces of fruit fitting neatly in between T-Rex's teeth, go for it. I couldn't prove it, but in reality, it fits with the biblical teaching that all the creatures were vegetarian, and therefore whatever went on Noah's Ark, albeit a T-Rex maybe this big, was not a threat to Noah no matter what. I'm pretty sure that most of the creatures, particularly those with long tails, use their tails for exactly what their reptilian cousins still do. Even when a baby crocodile in Australia or the alligators in the USA are born, or the ones in Asia, their tail is fully stocked up with food so they can survive for months, even just after they're born, without necessarily having much to eat at all. And our biggest example of survival, we caught a crocodile here in Australia. It was really mad at being caught and being robbed of its freedom. So they trussed it all up and it immediately went into a sulk. If you think little kids sulk, you ought to see crocodiles. They sulk big time, right? And they took it to a crocodile farm, and the thing said, "You're going to capture me. I ain't going to eat at all." And it didn't. It didn't eat for the next 18 months and happily survived because it had all the food it needed stocked in its tail. Finally, it did give up, and it began to eat what the actual zookeepers, the crocodile farm keepers, actually gave it. But they would come to the ark well stocked up, and probably Noah and his kids actually gave them a top-up meal just before they got off.
You also got to remember, this is before the first major climate change recorded in history, right? The first climate change is recorded after the flood. Before, you still have a remnant, if you like, of the original creation when the world was very good. The climate would have still been very good. And so both the animals and the plants are at optimum point to be able to survive, and not just survive, but actually thrive, right? So you've got optimum animals actually entering the ark and being able to survive for that length of time, no problem at all. Especially your reptilian side of things.
There's also the fact that virtually all coprolites ever found with dinosaur poo is containing plant material.
Yeah.
There's very little evidence of dino poo with meat in it. Is that right, John?
You do find quite a few dinosaur poo with bones in the poo, but whether they captured it or ate it once it was dead, the typical sort of progression that we watch even today is a creature starts out as a vegetarian, then it will move to eating dead things, right? Then it will move to eating live things. We saw that particularly in the example of the Kia parrot in New Zealand. Started out vegetarian, and then it moved to eating dead sheep that were occupying its space. Then it moved to eating live ones and became an active carnivore. And that looks like the historical progression in every case. So with dinosaurs, they most probably moved from plant eating through to becoming scavengers, and finally to attacking live things if they could catch them, kill them, and keep them.
Right, okay. I think we've probably beaten that question to death. Let's move on to something a little bit different. This one comes from Sandy C. This goes back to the vestigial organs thing. She did ask me to ask it. So in honor of that, Sandy, I will ask. Question, have people ever died from having vestigial organs removed?
Dr.
Have they ever
Diane.
died from having vestigial organs? Well, vestigial organs basically don't exist, so you are removing functional organs. Now, there are some things that you can live without. So tonsils used to be regarded as vestigial organs. And in fact, they used to take out healthy tonsils from kids, just any kid who had a sore throat. We don't do that anymore. But tonsils are part of what's called lymphoid tissue. We have lots of it. And so if you take out part of it, yes, you don't die. People have died from complications of having their appendix removed, just like you can have complications from any surgical operation where things go wrong and you can get infections and things like that. But the actual loss of the appendix is not what actually killed them. It's something that's gone wrong with the medical treatment or with that person's immune system or something like that. There are some interesting things in history. There's a piece of lymphoid tissue in your chest called the thymus gland. And in the early days of radiation, they actually used to irradiate that and to make it shrink, because in babies it's unusually large. Lymphoid tissue does a lot of its work in your early life, so it's very large and apparently active. And before we really knew what it did, it was thought to be a vestigial organ. And babies that were treated like this eventually got problems from being irradiated. So yes, it's a good example of how evolution is actually bad for science. It's not good science at all, and it has led to some problems. But losing the so-called vestigial organs hasn't been a problem because they're not vestigial.
And of course, obviously, like you said, the appendix can get infected and it needs removing, right?
Yes.
Once it's been removed, because the function of the appendix is a holding bay for all the good bacteria, so when your body's getting clear. So once you've removed your appendix, whether that was for a good reason or a bad reason, once you've removed it, are you then more susceptible to falling ill because you haven't, or not being as healthy as you were before? Could that cause problems down the line?
Well, possibly. It's just that it's part of a whole system of organs called lymphoid tissue, and we have lots of it. So just because we've taken out one piece usually is not enough to kill you.
But it's not doing you much good.
It's not doing you any good to have any piece of your body removed unless it is actively diseased. Now, we do remove other organs if they get diseased that people don't think of as being vestigial. For example, the gallbladder. If it fills up with gallstones, they will make you very ill, and you are better off having that taken out. But no one would say that a gallbladder was a vestigial organ. So it's a matter of getting the balance right in terms of the hazards. So if an organ does become diseased, yes, it is possible to live without it, but that doesn't mean that it's a vestigial organ or a useless remnant. It just means it's become diseased, and that's part of the whole degeneration of our bodies and of the whole environment.
Let me just
Some
slip
people
in
can
a-
lose their brain and there's no observable difference.
Nothing
I'm not sure
personal.
whether that's a comment on the brain or the person, but
Let me slip into some
Take from what
advanced,
you will.
advanced notice here, guys. 1 hour and 30 minutes. We're doing well. But next week, in this coming week, I think it's Wednesday night for you, Joe, Thursday for me. But in reality, we have a program with Standing for Truth on polystrate trees and polystrate fossils, because the question came up really, what's inside them? So we're going to be dealing with basically a trip around the world, showing you all the polystrate trees that we've investigated, and dealing obviously with creation, Noah's flood, etc. So my time in Australia, for those of you watching, I'm on Thursday morning. But if you have a look at the Standing for Truth website, they will give you full details of that. So that's this 26, 27 / overlapping days. But have a look at their website, Standing for Truth. Next Saturday morning, I'll be missing, even though I'll be at the museum opening that night. I'm doing ministry in New South Wales, and just to make Joseph feel bad, he talked about having a long drive in England. My first stop is 7 hours away. So Australia is a big place, and I'm just hoping we can organise the transmission from there. And for those of you who are watching, notice John Mackay is not using PowerPoints and getting totally confused. I've almost been banned from using PowerPoint presentations until we can sort out the conflict with my computer, my laptop, and the screen. So pray for us, we'll be able to do that. Pray for us as I begin to head away on ministry in this coming week. Sam, back to you.
Yes, I think it might be a good idea to write you a written guide, John. Step-by-step guide with pictures, with highlighted like ringed circles with arrows pointing to where you need to click. I think that might be useful. Right. Okay. So we have there's a question that just on the SFT promo you just did. There's a question that came in from Shogwar a few streams ago. That's I haven't put it into the software yet. I had a geology lecturer who said he'd seen a picture of fossil trees where the rock layers were eroded away, so that all that remained was the bottom layer and the fossilized tree. Have you seen that?
I've seen lots of areas around the globe where it's like that. We have one of those not far from here. It used to be very visible alongside the motorway. Of course, unfortunately, they put a big concrete wall in front of the motorway there. So apart from me knowing it and taking pictures, almost nobody else knows that it's there. You will find in the program we do next week, we will show you some of these, particularly of the newer polystrate fossils that we've discovered. Sometimes you'll find the top of the tree and the bottom is missing. Now, whether it was ever there, you don't know. When you actually check the base of the tree, you will find it's sometimes got roots on it. So I go one step further and we dig the whole tree out to see if the roots are actually fully there. Now, in the majority of cases with the ones that are in the classic, the worldwide formations, they always have broken roots. In the more recent ones, we get volcanic eruptions and the volcanic ash comes down on top and rapidly buries up to 10 feet, 12 feet, 3 meters, 4 meters of tree. You will find the roots are still intact because they were buried whole. Still rapid burial, still polystrate, but in reality, different from a flood formation. But watch SFT coming up this week. Look up their website.
Exactly. Right. Okay. Next question. Here we go. So these two I will link together. This is more of a theological question, of which we are no stranger to on this channel. We don't just deal with dead things in rocks and rocks themselves. We deal with the biblical arguments as well. So this one here. So question, you're a bad person. This is supposed to be in quotation marks, but there wasn't enough room. You're a bad person. That's why you're going to hell. But believing in God, in God who's good, you can go to heaven through him. The response is, this really just sounds very unjust of an all good God. And then the next question after that is, I didn't choose to be a sinner. God made me that way. Shouldn't I be punished for my actions, not my unchosen nature?
Well, I'll throw in a thought for the first one, and then you can take over, Craig and Joe. The fact is, God didn't choose to make you a bad person. He warned Adam to not sin. Adam chose to sin. So if you want to blame anybody for making you a sinner, born a sinner, blame Adam. Because God told Adam exactly what would happen, and sin has passed on the whole creation because God never breaks his rules. If Adam hadn't have sinned, you may have had the shot of becoming the first sinner yourself. But in reality, the scripture says we've all sinned after likeness, sin after Adam's likeness. So if you want to blame anybody, it doesn't say you sinned after God's likeness. It says you sinned after Adam's likeness. So get your picture accurately so you can blame the first man if you're going to blame anybody. That's why I insist when we deal with the history of people that you look at the whole history, where it says in Genesis 1 and 2 and 3, God made Adam in his image. But in Genesis 5, it says Adam had a son who was born in his image. Now, at that point, Adam is a sinner. So from then on, once Adam has chosen to sin, it is Adam whose fault it is that you've been influenced by sin, right? So get the picture right. Anybody want to add anything else?
Yeah, it's the point that it's, I just saw Ravi pop up a question, what's Adam's actions got to do with me? Well, you're made in his image, right? So quite a lot. The reality is there's not a single person on this earth today who's made in the image of God. It's a controversial statement, but it just happens to be taught in scripture, right? Go to Genesis chapter 3, as John just said, and it says that Adam was made in the day that God made man, he was made in the image and likeness of God. Now, God being perfect, Adam was perfect. He was a perfect human being. Then it skips forward and it says, and Adam knew his wife and bore a son in his own image after his own likeness, right? So Seth was not made in the image of God. Seth was made in the image of Adam. At that point, Adam was a sinner. Therefore, Seth was a sinner. Therefore, everybody who's descended from Adam is automatically born a sinner. It's Adam's responsibility, if you like. It's the fault of Adam, right?
And I just interject something really quickly here. It's worth pointing out that it's not, when you say made in the image of Adam, it's not like the physical likeness of Adam, we all have the same face. It's the spiritual nature, it's part of it's physical as well, but like it's both parts of, we're two eyes, nose, mouth, head with arms and legs. But there's also the spiritual side of things, and we are made to have that relationship with God. That's what it means by likeness. We are like Adam in that sense. Carry on, Joe.
All right. Yeah. I've lost my train of thought. And Craig, any thoughts? Sorry.
Yeah,
Sorry,
well,
Joe.
Well, I think it's a little bit like, when my kids do something wrong and then they say, it's not my fault. Well, it really is your fault. You've done the wrong thing. And a part of that question was also, shouldn't I be judged on my actions, not Adam's? Okay, well, against what standard? And the standard is got to be God's standard. He's the one that sets the rules. So what's God's standard? And you can soon look at some of his standards, and the 10 Commandments are a good start, and see how you stack up against them. So, have you ever looked at a woman lustfully? Because that's regarded as adultery. That's breaking his law. Have you ever told a lie? If you lie once, what's that make you? A liar. And so on. So if you hate someone with a passion, that's as good as murder according to God's standard. So have you ever murdered someone? And if you are, you're going to be judged against that standard, and therefore you're guilty, therefore you're a sinner, and therefore you're going to have to face God's justice for that. But he's given us an out. He's given us someone that's paid the penalty, and it's still up to your faith choice. It's still up to your will, because we're created in the image of God. He has a will, we have a will, as John often points out. And so we have a choice to follow him. And we just are here begging people basically to make that choice because it has eternal consequences.
And to stop using excuses like blaming God for any problems you have that make you bad, because you can't blame God. You may be able to blame Adam, but then you'll find the scripture is emphatic that you have sinned after his likeness. Even if Adam wasn't here, you might have become the first man who was a sinner, right? And we'd have the same issue over and over again. And you do need to come to grips with the fact that you cannot pretend that you are God because you keep changing your mind about this, that, or anything else. You do not set the standards of righteousness. Humiliating, I know. The most people who have a problem with God wish they were God, right? The atheists aren't angry because God doesn't exist. They're angry because he does. And his standards will account for everything, not your own. So when you have a look, now, even if I made my own rules and I kept them, would that be good enough to go to heaven? And the interesting thing is, read your New Testament. God says, sure, if you could keep even your own rules, you'd make it. But you've heard of New Year's resolutions, you broke them, right? You broke them, you make them again. You can't keep your own rules. There's basically a problem with mankind, and it deals with this issue of I am a sinner by choice. But to finish off with one last thing, you don't go to heaven because you're good enough, because you could make all the rules you wish and you will find you can't keep them. You don't go to heaven because you're good enough. You go to heaven because of the point Craig was making, that Jesus came and he was good enough. And because he was good enough, he could choose to die on a cross and unfairly, unjustly pay the price for your sin so that God could attribute his power of forgiveness through Christ to you. Jesus took the penalty. That's the whole point of this whole program. Jesus was good enough. So if you're not on the way to heaven now, and so many of the questions that come in indicate the asker is not, and they indicate the asker wants to be God and make the rules themselves, and reality tells us that you are not even succeeding at doing that. If you want to be with Christ for eternity and meet Joe remade, meet Craig remade in Jesus' likeness, meet John Mackay without a computer problem and without a temper or anything like that, then you'll need to know Christ, because he was good enough and he did die and he did rise from the dead, and he has solved the problem. So no matter what you think the problem is, Jesus has fixed it. Agreed, Craig?
Absolutely.
If I could just add one quick thing on the end of that, because we got questions coming through again about where did sin come from, and I know we've had this question over and over again, right? And the question itself is a dud question. The question itself is not actually something that you can answer, because sin is an action. It's a disobedience of God's rule, right? It's like saying the question, well, where did running come from? Well, at some point you made the choice to move your legs and to run, right? That's the whole point that we keep saying about it. Sin is a choice, and sin started with Adam. God gave Adam a choice. He said, don't eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Adam chose to disobey. Adam chose his wife over God, and as the result, he had sinned. He had disobeyed what God had told him to do or not to do, right? It was one rule, and he chose his wife. He chose to disobey God over his love for God. So where did sin come from? Well, sin comes from a choice. Everybody has a choice. Adam had a choice. That's where the start, that's the first sin recorded. It was the first action of sin against God, was when Adam ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And since then, every single person has been sinning and willfully choosing to do so, and willfully choosing to run in the opposite direction. I mean, we are created, we are born eventually with the ability to run, right? That's what we do. We choose to run. Adam was created with the ability to make the choice. He was given a will to choose, do I follow God or do I follow my own desires? He chose to follow his own desires, right? So it's an action, it's an effect. It's not a something that starts, it's something that he chose to do in the beginning.
Perhaps if I just throw in one other thing that might be helpful here, Joe. We've had this question in the form as, well, where did evil come from? Right? When we look at evil in our language, we borrowed it from ancient Sanskrit. You know, as I travel all around the world, you go from evil, but V's are often pronounced as B's or F's or things like that. So evil eventually ends up in ancient Sanskrit as upel, up as in up, right? Up and over the line. You've heard of crossing the line. Mum and dad say you'll go this far and no further, and so you deliberately reach into the cupboard where you were told not to go and grab a jelly bean. You have done evil. You've crossed the line. Now, the question is, the line is decided by the person who created, because he has the right to create it. So when God says, Adam, here's the line. That one's your tree. This one's my tree. Look, you've got 29 million trees that I'm allowing you to eat, but here's a line you won't cross. Now, what right did God have to do that? He was the creator. Take it up with him if you like. You won't get very far. He's got all the power, all the brains, all the rights to actually decide where that line is. What's his purpose? Well, he knows better than you do that if you cross that line, it's dangerous for you. Evil, up and over the line, going on to the other side of the line is bad for you. So he knows in love that he doesn't want you to go there. The wages of sin, the problem of crossing the line is it will kill you. Now, God knew that. He had made the rules. So in reality, he has the right to make the rules. And most of the questions about where does sin come from, where does evil come from, that your hidden assumption is you don't want God to have any more rights, any more power than you have. Sorry, get rid of it now. Humble yourself. Admit that the God of the Bible, the Jesus Christ who came, have every right to make the rules, because you haven't made a universe. When you do, make the rules yourself, right? But until then, you better humble yourself and accept his rules, and better than that, accept the fact that he was gracious enough to say, you've broken the rules, you've crossed the line, I'm going to send my holy righteous son who's willing to die and pay the price of your stepping into evil, your sin, all of the things that come from that. And that's exactly what Jesus did. So stop running away. Stop denying the fact that there is a way out of sin. Even if you don't like being in sin, great. Join Jesus Christ, cross the line, ask him to be your savior and forgive you right now. You've got no other way. God has every right to determine where the other line is, heaven and hell. And that's a very real line that exists as well. And you'll find that out much to your detriment if you die not knowing Christ as your savior.
And can I just add, John, that we couldn't possibly know where sin came from unless it was revealed to us. So the first man who did it has recorded that and has passed it down. And the incredible thing is that the Bible is so incredibly consistent from that point onwards over thousands of years of records. It's a one consistent story through from that point of the curse of the sin of death through to the last book in the Bible written over 1,500 years later, where that curse is dealt with. And in the letters of Paul, where the failure of the first Adam is fixed by the success of the second Adam, Jesus Christ, this incredible story is put together in a way from the first record of where sin came from to the solution of it at the end in such a way that no human being could compile it. It has to be God that has revealed this entire story to us in advance when it comes to the Messiah coming. So this is something I look at. The greatest evidence we have got is not necessarily looking at creation or anything like that. It's the Bible itself. This is incredible evidence. And when you can take that in totality, this is just incredible evidence that we have a God who has revealed to us all of the problems that we're dealing with and the solution to it.
Yeah, and
one word there I'll comment on before I hand back to you, Joe. The word fair, this enters into theology and justice and all of that, and has become the dominant word in the woke world. Is it fair that I'm black and fair that you're white? Is it fair that you have more rights than I am? If I'm crippled, is that fair? Now, fair has nothing to do with reality, right? If you are a person whose legs don't work, admit what you are and get a wheelchair, right? Don't sit there complaining it's not fair. In reality, you'll find God never deals with the word fair. He deals with what is right. He deals with, is it true? Is it just? Is it right? Or is it wrong? He doesn't deal with fair. I know it's humiliating because it means you can't get your theology imposed on God. But since he's more interested in is it right and is it wrong, you'll find that his system is far better and it's the only one that works.
Yeah. And to be honest, I just wonder if sometimes the people asking these questions are really listening to the answers, right? Yeah. Some of this chat seems to continue on as though people aren't actually listening to the solution to these answers. So I just throw the challenge out there, chatsters and people watching, to actually pay attention to some of these answers while they're being given.
To give you the whole overview, you start with Adam, who was created as a perfect human being. He was created in the likeness of God, who is a perfect being. So Adam was perfect. But you'll find the choice that Adam made, he chose to disobey God. He chose his wife over his relationship with God. And as a result, Adam's nature now changed. He no longer had the nature of a perfect person. He had a sinful nature. He had the nature of a fallen human being. And as a result, all those who are made in Adam's image from that point onwards are simply going to have that sinful nature. So sinful nature started with Adam for sure, because he made that step, because he chose his wife, because he chose sin, because he chose to disobey God. As a result, he inherits this. He begins this sinful nature and passes that sinful nature down to all those who are made in his image. It just so happens that everybody descended from Adam, including you, me, Diane, and everybody watching, are all made ultimately in the image of our sinful fathers. They're made in the image of their sinful fathers all the way back to Adam. So you'll find that it's an inherited nature, but it still doesn't, you can't say, oh, well, I inherited, therefore it's not my fault, because you still choose to sin every single day. It's still a choice that you make to rebel against God. That's why we need a savior who can surpass and transcends this sinful nature that we have inherited. Any other comments, or shall we deal with one last question before we begin to wrap up?
I will say.
Go on, Sam. Sorry.
Just something quickly on there. Ravi, I know that obviously you have been asking these questions, and it's perfectly valid to ask these questions. I had these same questions as you not too long ago. And I completely understand your viewpoint and where you're coming from. I completely get it. My invitation to you is still open. I know we've exchanged a few emails a few times. That goes for anyone else who's having questions or what have you. If you want to get in touch and have a sort of like offline discussion without the distractions of the chat and things like that, where we can really go into some detail on some really pressing questions, then please do get in touch. And either myself, or I'm sure Joe or John or Craig or something like that, we can arrange something. We'd be more than happy to go into a bit more detail sort of in person with you.
I don't think we need to keep covering this over and over.
That's what I'm trying to say. Is that I think we've covered this as well as we possibly can, and I think we need to move on and try and tackle some other questions that other people have been very kindly sending in to us to answer. So I will pull up a question. This one comes in from Jim P. He says, if there was a post-flood ice age, wouldn't some kind of glacial impact be expected?
I'll give you a first comment on that. By glacial impact, my question is, are you thinking of a meteor or a comet or anything like that? Because if you are, it's certainly been thought of as where would this ice come from? Some good suggestions have been made that people like Barry Setterfield and others have taken up. And also the guy who did the checking on Einstein's theory of relativity, he took up the thought that the Earth has wobbled on its axis because it was hit by a comet in some way, shape or form that also would have deposited ice. So there's nothing new under the sun, proving it's a different matter, right? So that's probably as far as I can go on that one. As to where the ice would come from, using the concept of a slow climate change really doesn't work because ice happens to melt as fast as it will build up if you're trying to change the climate like that. Joe, you got any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, if you mean impact as in the impact that the glaciers had on the planet's surface and stuff like that, yes, you would. You can usually tell the difference between a valley that's been carved by a glacier or a valley that's been carved by water. You'll find that the valleys carved by water are far more prevalent, shall we say, including what are known as dry valleys, which are valleys which have no water remains in them, like little rivers or streams or stuff like that, right? So you've got to deal with some major flooding catastrophe or water washing off the planet to produce them. We do see stuff that can certainly be interpreted as a evidence of a glacier, impact of glaciers on the landscape. It was actually, if I remember correctly, John, from our discussions, it was a creationist who first proposed the idea of enormous glaciers and covering a big part of the Earth's surface, the continental part of the Earth's surface. And there certainly does seem to be sufficient evidence talking in the world, particularly at the hemispheres, of these large glaciers covering an enormous part of the land. But to then take that interpretation and use that absolutely everywhere is where you've got to be careful. That's what we were referring to earlier, right? Taking that interpretation and say, well, okay, if there was at this point and this is what it produced, then maybe every time we find this, we assume that it's an ice age. And then that's how you end up with the idea of multiple ice ages happening over millions of years, right? And fluctuations and stuff like that. That's where you've got to be really, really careful.
I'm not sure if this has come out of our chat about Fossil Bluff and the glaciers there. It might have been a question that Jim's raised from that. And yeah, we're not denying that glaciers have impacts and even can create fossils and so on. But interestingly, the ice age in Tasmania, even from the secular point of view, doesn't suggest that there was any glaciers in the region of Fossil Bluff. They're more talking that was a glacier back in the Gondwanan period when it was joined with Antarctica. So, we've got to look at the catastrophes, the unconformities and all those things and how they really fit the evidence. And I think this particular example seems to fit the story of Noah's flood a little bit better than a big glacier.
Great stuff. All right. Well, I think that unless there's any final comments, we're sort of moving towards the end mark. John, any final comments or anything before we begin?
Again, a reminder, this week you and I have got the Standing for Truth program on polystrates around the world and particularly what's inside them. How did they get there? So that's a great program. I was doing some preparation on that before we started here this morning. I'm looking forward to the whole bang lot. And next Saturday, I'll be missing. I'll be on the road driving on a 7-hour first hour stop. So you can pray for that one. But I will be joining you at the museum. And we've got a great preparation, as Craig will remember. So we'll see you next Saturday night UK time.
Yeah. And over the next few days, we were just discussing this with Sam beforehand. One of the things that we'd like to try and do is a number of live videos, hopefully one a day if we can, or something like that, in preparation for the open day, showing you some of the behind the scenes and stuff like that. We'll be filming a lot of the behind the scenes as well, the kind of work that's been going on, the helpers and the volunteers and the plans for admins and stuff like that. And you'll get to meet some of the new workers that are stepping up to come and work with us here in the UK with the museum project and help run some of the administration side of things, because that's one thing which I do not enjoy in the slightest. I'd far rather get on with the research side of things, right? But you'll get to meet some of these people and the kind of help and work, and you really get up close, and it helps you to understand the personal side of creation research, right? The behind the scenes that is so essential to the functioning ministry, not just the in front, hello, this is us kind of thing, but also, Diane, a reminder, you're going to be filming with us.
Yes, indeed.
I'm really looking forward
lots
to
of
that.
interesting things to film.
Absolutely, yeah. We ended up writing down, it was close to 20 different topics that we could discuss about. So if we end up with our 20 to 30 minute, we've got an entire, we've got multiple seasons there, not just a series. So
Yes,
it should be.
We've got to start somewhere. So
Absolutely. No, we're very much looking forward to doing all that. So be sure to keep an eye out for those. And of course, we do need your help. Of course, we do need your support, both in prayers, both in financial support, and in your volunteer help, and come and get involved and encourage us, because we really do need that as well. But until next time, unless there's any final comments from the rest rest of the team. We will see you next week. We'll be discussing vestigial organs. You'll still be with us, Diane, next
I
week?
will, yes.
And we'll be very much looking forward to that. No, John, but never mind. You'll be back next week because you probably won't be there next week, the week after that. So we'll be changing around the team a little bit. But do continue to support us and watch out for us, particularly over the next few days as we try and bring you some live videos. So God bless everyone, and we will catch you next time.
See ya.
Yes. Goodbye.